So here is the fuselage as I've got it started. I did end up putting a little piece of triangle behind that bulkhead at a right angle. And then I've cut out the little turtle deck here. And I'm just installing it, putting a little glue on it. And I've already pre-rolled it a little bit. The trailing edge basically becomes flat and the other part goes on that little bulkhead. And you can see I start on one edge and then make sure it's flush against the back portion where my thumb and my finger are there. And just make sure I glue it down and get rid of the excess glue. Goes pretty well, relatively easy to do. And that's just fine. So once that's in, and I make sure I'm pressing down to that end to make it flat. And just making sure everything is exactly where it's supposed to be. And that's really simple, and that worked out really well. And really poor camera there, but the edges need to be pushed down and make sure that they're nice and tight. But with a little extra glue, they are. I also, by the way, before I put that on, I made little holes where the struts are going to go. And those white parts with the hatches, those are going to be a couple of things for some kind of, a couple of fairings that go on there. So there it is. And so now we just got to do the front end. And so everything so far is going along quite well. And life is very good at this point. Just making sure it's nice and tight and looks good. Still square, pretty nice finish, so that's pretty good. Now, the front end consists of these pieces, so the cockpit and the front gunner's part and the instrument panel. Now, the instrument panel is just two pieces of paper sandwiched together, and it's supposed to go, based on the directions, way up in front. It's supposed to go way up there at that connection point where I'm showing you. Now, for me, this seems kind of a weird place to do it. It seems to be pretty far away from the guys in the cockpit. But anyway, following the directions here. Oops, make sure the instruments face the pilots. And so I'm going to go ahead and glue those in, and I've already sort of put a middle mark where I know where it's supposed to go. And I just go ahead and glue that in place and make sure it's straight. Everything's wonderful. By the way, this is all going to basically go pear-shaped in a little while here. That's the point of this video. So I'm putting this on, and I even go to the issue of making sure the edges are glued on with a little super glue, because it's hard to get around the edges. And I squeeze them together and make sure that everything is good and solid, and that it's going to have this beautiful shape, etc. And then I'll be able to start putting it on the top of the forward fuselage. So this is all, at least off of the airplane, is going really well. Everything's sort of smooth. Everything's fitting. I'm pretty pleased at this point, but my hopes will be dashed in fairly short order here. But this is just making sure that it's nice and tight, and I'm really taking pains to make sure it's nice and tight. Forget the fact that ultimately I end up pulling it all apart anyway. So that piece is together, and the rear is going to be able to add it on with ease. That'll be no problem. That part will come together when I put everything on the top of the fuselage. But I'm just making sure that this is nice and solid. Now, this is the front piece. Now, I assume this goes on those tabs like this. And I thought, that's a problem because my instrument panel is there. So I pull off the instrument panel that I just painstakingly put in, which is not a big deal, but I think, what a stupid thing for me to do. Sand this a little bit, make it nice again. And I decided to put this together, because I've done this on some Holinsky kits, where if you actually put the skins together and then put formers in there, or put the stuff around the formers, the more skins you can add before the formers, the better. You can get a really nice seam. So that's what I thought I'm doing here. So I match that up along the edge, just so, and squeeze it, tighten it down with the forceps, make sure that it's you know, perfectly glued, and everything's been rolled a little bit so it fits easier. And I'm just making sure I'm hiding all that white and making sure that everything is squished together and glued, making sure I get a nice seam there. Here I am adding the rest of it, and I'm making sure with some wide tweezers that I'm getting good glue adhesion. And here I'm making sure I get rid of that white spot. Some of that is glue, I believe, and get rid of that with a little bit of a finger and some water, or just my finger. So that piece now looks like it's going to fit grand. So I start trying to test fit it, and lo and behold, it's too wide. I can't see how it's going to fit to that front piece, and if I match up all of the tabs, the cockpit sits very high, so there's a very high step on there. So I'm kind of confused at this point on how this is going to go. It's above the rear turtle deck, and so I'm kind of like, what the heck is going on here? So I keep trying to figure out why there's a problem. But if I roll this thing over, the top of that piece where my thumbs are is be super high. So I'm not sure what's going on. So then I decide, okay, I'll stick my instrument panel back in now that I got those pieces together. Now that won't interfere. I'll put that back in, and that will give me some stability, and that will make it so that I should be able to add this more directly to the fuselage, and everything will go swimmingly. At least that was the plan. So basically, again, making sure that is smooth and nice, and now I'm all excited, and I put this on here, and I'm finding that the instrument panel is too wide. I'm pulling up these tabs thinking, okay, it has to go inside the tabs in order to put that in, but even then, the instrument panel is too wide for where it's supposed to go. Now maybe, and it's quite likely, my front of that fuselage is actually canted in a little bit. It's all just paper. But I'm finding that when things are trying to connect here, nothing is lining up. I can't get things to line up around that front piece very well, and I certainly can't get the instrument panel even to be fit in there. So I'm starting to kind of wonder what's going on, and it likely is my fault. So what I decided to do here was, okay, let's just glue on something that I know is going to work. And I was debating whether to put this front piece on first or that decking, but I thought, okay, I know this fits because this does fit nice. So all I did here was put glue on all these pieces, including the vertical parts of the windows and all those areas in between. And yeah, there I'm putting on some on the actual piece that goes over on the underside of that. And just go ahead and put this on, and this worked very, very well. Nice and smooth, fit like a glove. This was no problem at all. So we just start on one end and basically make sure that it's glued up against, there's no seam, and make sure the bottom is flush with the bottom of the cockpit floor. And when you roll this over, lo and behold, those windows match. There's no white showing through. It's just glorious. Looks really good. And if you hold it long enough, everything dries. You see, I roll that over, and there it is. And it's supposed to be proud on the top. It's supposed to sit slightly above. But all I do here is make sure that this thing fits, and that it is straight, and that there's no seams, or very few seams. And this is looking pretty good. Aside from, you can see there a little bit of diagonal on that top portion. Oh, and then here I'm squeezing the windows just to make sure that they're contacting. And a little glue squeeze out is okay. You just get rid of that with with a paintbrush. So that was no problem at all. But you can see there, I do have my side of my fuselage is canted in. So maybe this is part of my issue. But I'm very pleased with how this is looking right at this point. Starting to look at the front end. So there I got that worked, and I'm like, things are going better. So, may as well give this other one a shot again, because this looks good again. Now I'm confident. But I still kind of figure that out. So now what I decided to do was attach this instrument panel further closer to the cockpit opening. I figured that would be easier for these guys to actually see if they were in it. And instead of having that glued in place, I also found this. So this is something that is supposed to, this round piece, looks like a bottle cap. This is supposed to form that opening on the front. So I took a little edge tab and I glued it in place, and as long as you basically glue the skin around the edge all the way around, that should kind of force it into this nice pulpit look, and that's going to be where your scarf ring mount is going to go and the Lewis is going to go. And this might help shape that front end, I'm hoping, so that it will make a good fit onto that front of that fuselage. And so all I do here is add a little glue, just a little bit at a time. I add it to the tabs as I go here, and I 2 or 3 or so at a time, and then I roll the skin around it, make sure that it butts up to the edge where it's supposed to be, and then squeeze it down with tweezers and or a thumb. I'm just making sure that it's curling around where it's supposed to, and as it curls, it works really well. When I curl this thing around, it fits just fine. And I'm just making sure each time that I'm getting it better and better attached, and that everything is perfect and straight and smooth. So I keep doing this, and I basically am going to do this all the way around to finish it. So that was horrible. I ended up taking out that piece that made the circle, and I just butt jointed this on the edges all the way around in the front to get the front end finished. So all those parts are all glued to the edge. They look pretty dang nice. Everything kind of lines up, looking good, but I don't have that circular piece, the bottle cap thing in there, and I don't have my instrument panel because I decided to just take it real slow. The other thing I ended up doing was cutting this, because if I kind of squeeze those together and they overlap a little bit like that, then I have the right height from the side. If you look from the side, it's supposed to be kind of flat there, and if you actually have it, that's part supposed to be kind of horizontal. But if you leave it the way it is, it goes way up in a real funny angle. So I'm test fitting this to come around and see if I can line this up. And what I found is if I line up the white parts on the ends of those tabs, and you can see I'm overlapping where the opening is for the front pulpit, then I get a nice angle that looks like it's supposed to based on the 3 views I've seen, and I think that's going to work. So first thing I do, oh yeah, and here's the picture. This is what I'm trying to go off of. You can see it's flat up where the Lewis gets mounted, and pretty much flat against the ground, but then there's that little slope that goes up, a little hump. And that's what I'm trying to recreate by doing this. So first things first, I put my instrument panel in. I add a little piece of wood behind it so that it's a little bit more solid, doesn't bend so much. But I glued this in, not to the skin, not to the top skin, but to the sides to see if this would work. And I've kind of test fitted this and make sure it looks okay. So I put my instrument panel in this case first. This is not what you're supposed to do, but in my case, it's going to work just fine. Again, these problems are things that are not likely the kit's fault. They're probably something that I did wrong. So I'm just making sure it's straight, making sure it looks pretty good. And then give it some time to dry. Once that happens, then I can start to glue that front cockpit part to the top fuselage there. And so these tabs provide a really nice place for there to be glue. And in this case, all I'm doing is gluing those. I didn't glue the back, I didn't glue the front. And I left, in fact, that top slit that I cut in the pulpit, I left that to be a top slit. I haven't glued anything there, just so that when I put this other piece of paper on, it'll actually automatically kind of slide them together. So the first thing I do here is I add this along the side, getting rid of that white and making sure it's squeezed down tight. More tweezers work, making sure things are nice and tight and that I'm getting good adhesion. I'm not worried so much about how things are going to attach, like I said, on the front and the back. I'm trying to get those pieces to be nice and level. And if that's level, I'll be good. So then I slide it around and I attach it to the other side. And when I do that, it automatically sort of folds over that front pulpit, and you'll see that in a second. And it cants up and gives a nice diagonal look to it. So I'm making sure, again, that it's covering the tab, which is the most important thing in my case. So that's looking pretty good. Do the same old thing, squeeze things, make sure they're closed. Notice the rear part, I'm not worried about that sticking up. That can easily be fixed. But I'm trying to make sure this thing looks good, and that the front end looks like the pulpit is supposed to look. And then I go back and I start to glue the back strip on, and that just is going to be butt glued against the rear decking. Works just fine. And ultimately that's going to be covered with a cockpit combing piece, which I'll show later. That fits really nice actually, and it finishes it off pretty good. This again is all stuff that is sort of not the way you're supposed to put it together. So again, this is because probably something I did wrong with the kit, because it's the first problem I've had. There's no reason to think suddenly this stuff wouldn't fit. So I just make sure this is down and dries and looks good, and just kind of make sure it's in place and has the right curve on it, which is just fine. Get rid of excess glue. Now I go under the front there. You see it's loose, and I'm trying to do here is basically now glue those flaps basically together where I cut the front pulpit slot. Again, that's not supposed to be cut, but I did it so that I can then basically push down on this thing and make it be a good profile. Without that, it's way too high and it looks humped. It looks really, really bad. So I was forced to do these little modifications. So squeezing that shut, making sure that's good. And right about here, I'm also starting to notice that the front cockpit where the gun's going to go is oval. It's not round anymore. I'm also noticing it's a little out of shape. So remember, this piece hasn't glued either. It's just floating. So I put some glue underneath that slot, or underneath that flap. And the reason I'm putting in a fairly good amount, and again, all the excess will come right off, no problem, is that I want to sort of force the fuselage into a straighter mode. Because I look on this, it's crooked a little bit. So I'm pushing with my thumb, and I'm actually kind of pushing that front end into alignment. And as I do that, I am holding it in that position by having that glue adhere to that top forward decking. If that glue holds, that should help take some of the twist out of the front end of this thing. You probably can't see it, but believe me, it's there. And this actually ended up working very well. It's not perfectly straight, so there's a fellow named Ricardo who made this model beautifully. Mine isn't Ricardo-esque, but it's not so bad. Now there I'm pointing out that you can see that is oval and it's supposed to be round. So we're going to have to see what we have to do with that. But overall, not too shabby. Pretty pleased. And now I'm just going to try to figure out how to make that front end look a little more round. But at least it's closed. It's even. Looks okay. And so the profile is much better than what I had. So a little hump is okay, but not a lot. Again, what will go around the edging is a cockpit edging, which will go around there. And that finishes it off, excuse me, very, very nicely. So I think everything's turned out. It was just a struggle, and I think it's all my doing. So do as I say, not as I do.